Sometimes when you're driving down the road all by yourself, you begin to hear a voice that tells you need to look around, pay attention, maybe something isn't quite right. That voice is me. It's the voice of Gord. Hey everybody, happy Monday. Quick little intro here for you as always. My next guest on today's show is a gentleman by the name of Harvey Beech, who I came to know through working with previous guests of the show, American Truckers United, who've been doing the important work of trying to figure out why the trucking industry in America is so screwed up in 2025. Harvey is going to bring us some intel on the financial side of it, because what we've seen is that trucking companies have been getting deferrals from truck sellers and manufacturers, basically allowing operators who are underwater on their trucks to keep operating and preventing the market from clearing them out. And as you know, we already have a serious overcapacity problem in trucking, and it seems the greed of the financial class is only serving to make that worse. Harvey joins the show today to share all of that with us. I've got another half a dozen episodes recorded that I have to edit and get out to you. There's a few people who Harvey was bumped ahead of, but, Trump tariffs are coming down the pipe and everyone's going to be freaking out about that and the effects on the trucking industry. And Harvey is talking about one aspect of this story that is being left out of it and may have some pretty serious consequences if a number of financial houses get bit in the ass by their decisions not to repossess trucks and to give out loans in the first place to people back in 2021 at the top of the COVID demand spike when trucks were just way overvalued and then the interest rates being issued were ridiculous and it just wasn't ever going to work. And sooner or later the bill is going to come due for that, and Harvey is here to tell you just about what that is so you're not surprised about it. You can find Harvey on Twitter at EOS Trucking and me on Twitter at Gord McGill. If you haven't already, subscribe to my Substack, autonomoustruckers.substack.com. I'll share a link to you in the show notes for the book I'm writing about the state of the American truck driver in 2025. And Harvey and the guys at American Truckers United have been very helpful in that regard with all the research they've done. Harvey's great, and this is a very information-dense podcast. Please pay attention. Share it with your friends. If you're in trucking, this is of extreme import to you and for understanding what's about to happen and some of the other factors beneath the headlines about tariffs and what's become of the American trucker today. All right, let's get to Mr. Harvey Beech. All right, g'day everybody. Welcome back to another fabulous episode of the Voice of Gord podcast. I'm Gord, and this is my voice. I have a very special guest today. All of my guests are very special, but this gentleman in particular has got some deep and very of-the-time insights into what's going on with the American trucking industry. It's facing a number of challenges and adversities right now. And one of those challenges has been mostly unremarked on by the trucking commentariat and the trucking media. We've been focusing a lot on problems downstream of a Biden program that flooded the market with drivers. People are starting to focus on Trump's tariffs. There's all the usual stuff that's always going on with trucking. But the particular issue my next guest is going to speak of, he's the first one to talk about it really in a very substantial way. And I'm very happy to bring this conversation to you guys. In fact, I'm going to bump this ahead of the half a dozen other conversations I still don't have edited and ready to release yet because it is so important. So the other voice you're about to hear today is that of a gentleman named Harvey Beech, who is part of American Truckers United. I interviewed his partner, Shannon Everett, a few weeks ago. And Harvey is here to tell us all about what's going on with truck financing and how all of that configures with the problems we're seeing in the trucking industry today. Harvey Beech, welcome to the show, sir.
Hey, Gord, thanks for having me today. I'm glad to be here and glad to talk about what we're going to go over today. It is the housing bubble 2.0, or I guess we could call it the trucking bubble.
Yeah, that's a very good way of putting it. So for, we probably got, I don't know how many really young listeners my show has, but most of the people listening to Voice of Gord and most of the people reading whatever articles that come out of this will understand that 2008 we saw a major financial crash, and a number of very dodgy financial instruments and banker schemes collapsed, and then the government stepped in to rescue banks, rescue automotive companies, and then we had kind of a minor depression in the economy around the entire world. One of the interesting things that happened was I was traveling in Iceland in 2008 when I was young and more of a vagabond. I spent 3 weeks hitchhiking around Iceland, and literally within a week of getting home to Canada, Iceland's economy collapsed just like everyone else's, and all three of their main banks turned to custard. And I thought to myself, did I fart when I was over there? What's going on here? But yeah, so 2008, there's all these structural problems with the economy, and the chickens from 2008, when you think about it in a big picture, have yet to come home to roost. But in the trucking industry, you are starting to see fracture lines and creases and problems that are going to make a similar thing happen within trucking. And I lay it all out for us.
Okay, Gord. So back in 2008, I was still a young man, old enough to be elbow deep um, into our operations, but young enough where it really made a mark on me, and I'm glad I went through it in 2007. But what I want to try to get across to everyone is I want to highlight the differences of how this is not a freight cycle and how unchecked lust and greed this time. We've already talked about the oversupply and the massive oversupply and the rapid injection. And then when you look at what happened with the used truck prices, that's where this started. And it's very similar to the housing bubble in that we had unchecked lust and greed that took over. And we started seeing 450,000 mile freight liners being retailed out there, well north of 150,000, probably north of 160,000 at 12 to 15% interest. And it went on at scale.
And what was the time period and context for this happening?
Well, I noticed the used truck prices really started going crazy there in the second half of 2020, but all through 2021. And
This
I
is this is the COVID demand spike when everyone starts ordering everything on Amazon. They're sitting at home, they're getting free government money or they're getting paid by their employers and they got nothing to do. And then you see this with flatbed too, because everyone's like redoing their house, they're fixing stuff that they've been forgetting forever. So now all the Home Depots are busy and the lumber yards are busy
yes,
and Amazon's
yes,
going gangbusters.
yes. On the ridge where I live, all through that time, there was at least two remodels going on for
Did you
a
did you
good
just
year, 18 months.
did you just say on the ridge?
Yes. Mhm.
Right. So I have a very good friend, a fellow truck driver, and former guest of this show and fan, extremely good friend of mine, named Chris Thomas. He's on Twitter at Indie Trucker. Everyone go follow him. He calls his home in the little neighborhood he lives in out in the hills of eastern Kentucky the Ridge.
Okay. 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 Well, I went a long time when my mother lived with me and rented for about 10 years. And in early 21, my kids started getting on me about I needed to buy a home. And we were able to buy a home. I'm actually having to sell it. I'm selling everything that I have personally that has any value, trying to downsize my family's existence to where we're all just debt free. Because as you already know, our livelihoods are being taken from us. But we've been conditioned to expect downturns and freight cycles. And that's why so many of us sat around beginning in the first quarter of 2023. We were prepared. We knew we were going into something that was going to be really intense um, in regards to the truck price. We knew there was a lot of people that bought trucks way, 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 way overinflated. And as soon as things turned the other way, they would be the first ones, after 90 days to have their trucks repossessed. And again, this is the difference between 2007 and 8 and today. In 7 and 8, our costs weren't highly inflated. It was a demand driven issue. This time, our costs were highly inflated through the big run. And they were selling those trucks. And in my opinion, that is when this pending bubble that has to burst at some point, that's where it all got created. And as people started failing, I assume that the financial institutions realized that, hey, this is so widespread and we are so upside down in these assets that we cannot afford to take these kinds of losses because it would, I guess, ultimately collapse them, very similar to the banks that collapsed back in the housing crisis. And again, it was the same practices, the overinflated prices, the overinflated interest rates, but also the underwriting procedures. And, I haven't dug in through the files or anything like that. I only have very close friends at all of these different institutions that I've known and worked with for 20 plus years.
When you
And I
say
would see
institutions, you mean other trucking companies and truck dealers and financiers.
truck makers, captives, finances, yeah, finance companies. Yes, sir. That's who I'm talking about here because the truck makers and the captives have played their part in this. The government did what they have done and flooded in all of these people that somehow had all of this money to go out and put down payments on trucks. And in some cases, we're paying cash for trucks. Um, so there it all took place. And when they figured out that they were going to have to start repossessing a bunch of those trucks, they haven't been repossessing trucks. And just like the second quarter of 2023, okay, if you go back to Swift's conference call, to paraphrase, the worst is more than likely behind us. There will be a balance by the end of this year, and 24 should be a good year for trucking. Okay.
Which
Well,
was incorrect.
of course it was incorrect. We've all been incorrect, but it's because we were all expecting the members of this free market to perform like they're supposed to, like they always have. You know, we did not think that the regulatory bodies would just stop enforcing regulation and allow this new ecosystem or second trucking industry to just thrive, leaving us to bleed, right? Well, we also did not did not expect the banks to allow what has become pretty much eternal deferrals.
Right. I want
Um,
you to explain that, right? So,
Let me walk you through the timeline
yeah.
and man, I've always been an open book. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to kind of tell you my personal story as I have walked through trying to guide this company through all of this. and the things that I was hearing from people that I've known forever that I respect their opinion. Okay, so we started bleeding money in January of 2023. And again, I cut my teeth on 7 and 8. I'm looking at my cash reserves. I'm looking at my untouched line of credit. I'm looking at the achievements that we have made to to achieve some of those cost structure efficiencies that the mega carriers that I'd learned from my time as at US Express when I was younger. Do I need to
So,
stop?
so when you say we, you mean your company, EOS
Yes,
Trucking,
EOS Trucking in North Little Rock, Arkansas.
right?
Yes,
So you're talking about your own trucking company that
my
you
own
run.
my own trucking company, just under 300 power units, 750 something trailers, a bunch of good people. We used to have a bunch of drivers that had been with us for a very long time. We lost a lot of those folks in 2023. EOS Trucking was destroyed by May of 2023. And we've been reeling ever since, trying to figure out how are we going to recover? How are we going to overcome this? And you know, my dad had always taught me, and 7 and 8 taught me, hey man, when something like this happens, there's nothing you can do to out operate a dirt cheap rate. You can't out cost cut a dirt cheap rate. You've got to have more cash, more gunpowder so you can hunker down and wait on everybody else to get their trucks repossessed. And then there's a balance sheet at that point. And that's what Swift was thinking too. Okay, we were all expecting the market to work as in previous cycles. But again, this is not a freight cycle. This has been a replacement cycle thus far. So it appears that, and let me just say, this is May of 2023. Okay, that is the first time that I have had someone from a truck organization tell me, "Hey, Harvey, you might want to think about not making your truck payments. There's other people not making their truck payments, and you don't want to be the guy out there making truck payments while others are not making truck payments." And at this point, this gentleman was not speaking about owner operators, um, and he sure wasn't speaking about foreigners from a different land that had come over here and they had been given loans, as long as they had an address and an identification and people were just getting loans. I have and I don't know if you want to edit this out or not. I'm just going to tell you, um, one of the institutions, we have written so many loans to people with the last name Singh that we don't know who they really are. We don't know where they are. We don't know how we're going to find them. Okay. And then as time has gone on, we've had shops call me, hey man, there's 7 Freightliners parked over here, 15 to 17 year models that people have just left. Do y'all need any old parts? And so we know that there's people just abandoning these trucks all over the country, right? But in May of 23, okay, and of course, I approached my CFO and he and I'm glad that I succumbed to what he wanted me to do, because in the end, I think it's worked out for our benefit because we've been one of the last carriers. Mid-sized people, okay, um, there has been a whole lot of folks have to go into deferral before EOS had to enter into deferral in the fourth quarter of 2024. Um,
Hey, Harvey. So just before we carry on, I want you to explain what, like, I mean, it seems obvious, but like some people listening to this might not quite get it. When you say
sure.
payment deferral, there's
Yes.
like, buying a truck or financing trucks is similar to a mortgage, but not quite. And I just want you to like make sure that like our
Sure.
listeners understand the mechanics of
Sure.
this and what
Sure.
the implications are of
Yeah.
you and all of these other carriers not
Yeah.
having to actually make these payments.
Okay. So, most mid-sized carriers, we have to take commercial loans to buy our equipment. Over time, you can work your way up to where you're paying cash for equipment, like the folks out at Heartland Express and all these. But for me, we grew. Um, pretty rapidly, 2018 through 2022. And we did that by going out and taking commercial loans on this equipment, usually financed for, depending on how healthy of a company, 3 to 5 years. If it's a team operation, you'll finance it 3 years. We financed everything 4 years, and that served us well as we've had to sell trucks with equity to throw more cash into this dumpster fire. And we're doing that still today. So when a downturn starts in our industry, of course, people start having negative cash flow, and then it's who has the cash reserves, and then as everyone runs out of cash, there's a lot of things they'll stop paying for, but one of the first things that you have to do is request deferral, which means you're not making your truck payment, which means you're going upside down um, in every month that goes by. And eventually, the banks are supposed to repossess. In 2008, there were oceans of trucks and when I say oceans of trucks, I'm talking about the fields that were on the side of Interstate 40 over in Tennessee and North Carolina. I had some drivers tell me there were fields out in Texas. They literally had to rent cow pastures to park trucks in because so many trucks got repossessed. All the dealerships were
The
safety
same the
hazards.
same thing happened in Canada, bro. I remember Ritchie Brothers, the big auctioneering house.
Yeah, yeah.
I drove by Ritchie Brothers yard near Edmonton, Alberta in it was 2008 or 2009, and they had a three-ring auction. They had the largest auction sale in the history of Ritchie Brothers Canada. I don't know about the US, but on their Canadian side, and I drove by their yard in Edmonton, and it was like as far as the eye could see, trucks, trailers, oil field equipment, forestry equipment. It was just like Caterpillar and trailers and just
Yes.
just like every
Yeah.
little boy's dream of like the maximum amount of toys was
Hmm.
sitting at Ritchie Brothers waiting to get sold.
That exactly. So there you go. Really, that tells the entire story. The fact that this situation has been a combination of hyperinflated costs, and we've had a shock loss to our rates by 25%. 7 and 8, we did not have hyperinflated costs. So the burn and the purge this time should have been much more intense and much quicker. And again, I'm going to go back to the Swift conference call or the earnings call where everyone was calling for a turnaround by the end of 23. I knew how much cash we were burning, and I knew that we compared to other operations, we had more going into it. So we knew we could outlast what should have been a very intense purge of capacity. And back in 7 and 8, it was just bankruptcy, failure, bankruptcy, failure, bankruptcy, failure, bankruptcy, failure, one after the other after the other. And either they haven't been reporting it. Yes, there's been carriers fail, um, but not like they were carriers of size, not like there was in 7 and 8. And I know anybody that looks like me, asset heavy, um, American employees running one logbook, um, you know, new equipment, maintaining things, doing things the right way that we've all
Yes,
been taught how to do.
doing things the right way,
Yeah.
playing by the rules,
Yes.
doing right by your employees,
Yes.
doing right by your fellow motorists on the
Yes.
highways, doing
Yes.
right by your customers, doing
Yes.
right by your creditors. You're
Yes.
trying to play by the rules and
Yep.
you are losing.
We are bleeding tremendously. If we have a brokerage that's able to sustain the loss on the trucks, they're able to. But me, I just had an overflow brokerage. And we have not been able to sustain, or we've been able to plug the bleed a little with some cost measures, but when you have a cancerous rate situation, there's nothing you can do but to hunker down and wait on the repossessions. And we've all been hunkering down. This started. Okay, so let me kind of keep going on my timeline. November of 2023, that's the first report I had of carriers that were entering into their 6th month of deferral. Okay. And hey, maybe those carriers are better than I am. Maybe they achieved some kind of a miraculous cost cut that I haven't been able to do. They're still operating today. So in November, I also met with my insurance renewal time. So I also met with two middle market insurance guys that I've known for over 20 years. They told me that a third of their customers were struggling to make insurance payments on time. Now, Gord, and you're in my chair and you get to where you're having to ask your insurance people for help, man, you are at the very end. You've got your fuel bill, people, and insurance. And the only one of those three you're gonna get any help from most of the time is your insurance. And they're only going to give you 60 days. So I'm sitting here in November. I also am told by one of the financial institutions that in November, that in their region, this particular rep, that there was only two of the over-the-road carriers in this person's book of business that were still current on their truck payments. So November of 23, I'm learning about people going into their 6th month. I'm hearing from one of the bigger and more conservative, I would say, compared to a whole lot of other financial vehicles of our industry, telling me that I am one of two carriers that's still current at the time. And the two insurance agents telling me that there's a third of their people struggling to make payments. So I'm thinking, okay, here we are. Finally, it's got to give. Produce season of 2024, we're going to go into the first quarter. We're going into the end of the year. People have insurance renewal. A lot of down payments have to be paid. We're going into the holidays. Nobody has the cash that they flow throughout the year to pay for the holidays. Base plates, a lot of times, are either a fourth quarter or a first quarter expense. So I'm thinking, okay, there's going to be this big purge. And come produce season of 24, it ought to be lit. So we buckle down, we make some moves, we're preparing for this turn. And of course, no turn whatsoever. Also, that year, December of 23 and January of 24, we felt a little bit of a blip. Okay. That's because all the foreign folks go home for the holidays, or they go home in the depth of the winter because they don't want to drive on winter conditions because they come from places that's never seen a flake of
Right.
snow.
On that note, I'm going to interject here a little bit. So I publish a lot of my writings on Substack, which is a sort of quasi blogging writing platform. I found another trucking writer on there. There's not very many of us. There's like less than 5. And this one dude he was writing a Substack called From Lawyer to Trucker. This guy was like a corporate lawyer, got sick of it, quit, went and got his CDL in Canada, and like moved over to trucking. And he found Substack and he was writing about his experiences on it, right? Cool. So I'm reading his stuff, and he's working for one of these Canadian mega carriers who are witnessing the influx of foreign labor into the industry and into the economy in general in Canada. And this company decided to like take advantage of some of these guys. So I don't mean to take advantage of them, but just like, okay, cool, we'll hire them. And this dude is telling me about how he's running team, right? Because like a lot of trucking companies, when you're a new guy, they want you to run team to learn from somebody else. That's a bad model for teaching people, but that's a separate discussion. But anyway, he's running with all these guys who are from India. And what he discovers is that like he'll do one or two trips with one guy and then he disappears because what's happening is, as you've identified, is they're cycling back and forth from India, whether
Yeah,
it's to escape the bad weather, their own cultural holidays.
yeah,
They found a wife, they've got family stuff going on. So there's literally uh, a commuter work camp thing going on with the North American trucking industry where we're literally bringing drivers from other countries here. They're not set up as like permanent residents or citizens, and they're not really like planning on staying in Canada or the United States. And they're literally commuting. They like come here, work for a few months, go back to India, go back to wherever they come from. And it's just like, oh,
yeah.
oh, okay.
So and it produces a false hope. It's happened every year since, including January and December and January, just this past several months ago. Everybody thinks, oh, here finally we're feeling this blip. It's going to turn around, and then we reach into the middle of February. They've all returned, and then there's this huge slide from the blip. Um, but anyway, to get back to this uh, eternal deferral situation, um, in November, we're thinking it's going to turn. And then, of course, we get produce season in 2024. We're looking around. Where are all the repossessed trucks? Why isn't anybody going out of business? Well, they're not repossessing trucks. They're not repossessing trucks. My God, my cash reserves, because we've been paying our payments this entire time. My cash reserves continue to dwindle as we struggle to try to figure out to find somebody to pay us a living wage for what we do compared to our cost, and we can't. August, okay, so go to August of 24. Um, at this point, I'm starting to approach everyone and say, hey guys, we're not broke, but we are bleeding very quickly, and we have been for a while. And before I have to tap in to my receivables line of credit, I know everybody's been having to give carriers deferral, um, BMO, and it's very public out there, their losses and all of this, and their complicitness in all of this. And listen, I'm angry, okay? I've had my cash reserves yanked from me. And it's a combination of government policy here in the United States. But these financial institutions and these truck makers, they play just as big of a part in this. So it's real hard for me to sit here and try to act like I have done something to get myself in this situation. You could have taken all of my bad decisions that I've ever made and wadded them all up, and there's no way that I could have ever done anything to get myself here. We had more than enough gunpowder to sustain the market and the function of how the market has worked all of these years. So what these and really ultimately it goes back to the shipping community. Shipping community has woken up to the situation. They have reached into the trucking industry, taken all of the cash reserves that they could possibly take in the form of paying everybody slave wage freight rates. Now they have reached through the trucking industry into the OEM's pockets in the form of there's never like this has there ever been such widespread non-performance on loans.
Right. I want you to talk about this because this is the fascinating part to me. And I think this is the key to your original premise about how we're having like a repeat of 2008, but within the trucking industry.
Yes.
Tell me and my listeners how this works with the deferrals and like the function of that in the background and how that's actually able to go on and when it's going to stop. When is this bubble going to burst?
Yeah, nobody knows when it's going to stop. So the truck makers and the financial institutions that chose to take part in that huge bubble that was created by those oversold trucks and over usury interest rates, call it. Now that has caused them to be so far upside down. They can't repossess trucks. They have not. They should have been mass repossessing trucks. And when all of this started, I called 5 different gentlemen at either banks or captives or truck dealers. And I'm like, hey, man, do y'all think they're going to go longer than 90 days? This is so deep and so wide because everybody was feeling it. I had just been back from that peer group meeting with 14 different carriers. Everybody was singing the same blues. We've never seen the shippers behave like this. They've taken away 30% of our business. They forced our rates down 25%. We're just bleeding, bleeding, bleeding. So I was told by everybody, oh, there's no way. There's no way. 2008, 90 to 120 days. It was started at 90, and by 120, we had repossessed the trucks. There's no way they're going to do this. And man, I was seeing it in my own life, and I knew how hard it was hitting everybody. So I was afraid that this was going to happen, and it has happened. But what has happened is the bank's failures to repossess trucks has drained the cash reserves of those of us who were left to compete all this time with people that weren't making truck payments. So not only are we out here having to compete with the foreign operators that have $1.75 to $1.80 cost structure out there because of the offshore jobs and slave wage
Or
drive.
less. I mean, that's high for them.
Or, well, I have seen a B1 operations numbers, and I have been deep into a Serbian operation, and they both are in that $1.74 to $1.83 per mile cost structure. But we also have at the time when I was still making payments at the time, and we've been through deferral rotation and all of that, and almost all of our financial institutions have been very understanding. Regions Bank has been one that has stood out like way out of line compared to everybody else. Hell, they put me into the special assets program for over a year, and I was still current. But they saw what was going on in the trucking industry, and they downgraded everybody. It didn't matter if you was making payments or not. But that's what has happened here. There has not been a turnaround because the financial institutions will not execute properly. And I mean, I am sitting here, in 6 months deferral with the captives. So I know it's going on. I have been forced into it myself after, a good 2 years of bleeding to where we got our cash reserves down to a very critical level. And like I said, when I had to touch my line of credit on my receivables because we were operating on our own money.
I want you to explain again for my listeners and for me again, because I'm retarded, but like they're not repossessing these trucks. There's all these
No.
deferrals. Okay.
Yes.
How is it they're getting away with that? What's incentivizing the loaners and the credit and the financing companies to say it's okay, keep deferring, keep not paying us.
Okay.
It's okay. We're not going to take the trucks back. And then in not taking the trucks back, they're allowing operators who would otherwise be exiting the market to continue going and to continue the overcapacity of the trucking market. But like I want to make sure that we completely understand why it is these trucks are not being repossessed.
Okay. Based on what I have seen, felt, experienced, and heard, it is my opinion. And I also want to say that I have been told as much as 80% of an entire over-the-road portfolio for a financial institution was in deferral in some form or fashion. Okay, so that is bank failure material. And large corporations are soulless. They're not doing this other than to protect their self. So without me seeing the numbers and knowing what's going on, but being old enough, and also I've sponged it all up and watched what happened in 7 and 8. They cannot repossess the trucks because when they do repossess the trucks, they have to record that loss. And this is so widespread, like never before, nowhere near anything like this ever before. They cannot. There's probably not any infrastructure that could execute such a repossession campaign, let alone if they did repossess all the trucks that they should have when they should have. They would have had such losses because of the overinflated prices at the overinflated interest rates that it would collapse the financial institutions altogether. We've got these institutions that are 100% in trucks. They are not in a array of a diversified portfolio. So just me been doing this my whole life and knowing what I know, and I'm just telling you, it's my opinion that I think they collapse if they executed it all the way they're supposed to. So now here we are, because they can't do it. They have ruined the strongest of us, ruined the strongest decade. My family has been in this business for 44 years. There's been companies already filed bankruptcy and or cease operations. The gentleman over in Florida, what I have heard about that gentleman that put that post out there, man, it's been nothing but high praise from other people in the trucking industry. One of the best guys and one of the best reefer companies in the Southeast for a long time. So seasoned companies that know how to handle a downturn. And again, I went through 7 and 8 in my mid 20s, and we've lived by those lessons ever since then. Um, there's carriers that have been in business for over 90 years that are in the same condition that the rest of us are in. Don't tell me a carrier that's 90 years old don't know how to weather a freight cycle. This is not a freight cycle in several ways. And the particular way we are talking about today is the financial institutions slash the truck makers can't go get those trucks because it collapses. I don't know if it collapses the entire organization, but it certainly collapses their financial captives at that point. And you know what? If it wouldn't do that, then they would have already been mass repossessing the truck. So here we all are.
So in not repossessing them, that tells us that we already know that a lot of these trucks are underwater.
Oh, way underwater.
They were the financing to acquire them was issued in a market in 2021 that was high.
Mm-hmm.
The trucks were overvalued, the interest rates were overvalued, and now if they repossess them now, the truck is worth less than what it was originally
way less.
financed.
Yes, and all of that is in combination with the extended crash in the freight rates. So the values of the residual values of trucks compared to the overinflated price. So it was overinflated on the front end, and now there's been a severe crash in freight rates. So there's been a drastic drop in residual value on the back end, creating this big, huge deficit. And they just can't absorb them. They just can't absorb them. And that really is the lay of it. And we don't know what they're going to do. We don't know. And here's what's so bad. Used truck pricing, and this doesn't necessarily have to do with this truck bubble and this financial, I believe, what could possibly wind up being a bailout. I mean, my God, we had General Motors, and which I don't remember. Ford didn't take a bailout, I don't think. I don't remember. But I know that, Chrysler and General Motors certainly had to be bailed out. Well, we've got 4 truck makers in this country. And whether it's foreigners drive them or it's Americans driving them, we got to have the power units to move the commerce in this country. So I'm afraid we're going to be looking at a too big to fail scenario where they're probably going to wind up getting some sort of a bailout. But what about all the people like me and my family?
Okay, so the question I have about a supposed bailout here, and this is not like a criticism of what you're saying, it's a criticism of the situation. So we have all these trucks that are underwater. We have finance companies that don't want to repossess because it's not going to look good on their balance sheet and it's all underwater and everyone's kicking this can down the road. But we are facing a major lack of work, right? So over and above the overcapacity that was started under Biden,
Mm-hmm.
which you and I and Shannon and everybody knows about now, it's well understood.
Yep.
And even those dirty bastards at the
Oh,
ATA
yeah.
have now they've tried to get out ahead of you guys and they wrote this letter to Duffy and they're quoting things that you guys were saying 6 months before they even admitted it, right?
Gord, the very people that wrote the advisement, and I think it was late 2019, advising our government to issue non-domiciled CDLs to non-citizens, has now completely turned to 180 and has issued that letter to Duffy. Yes, I am familiar with the letter.
Yeah, they're cretins. But so anyway, the point being overcapacity, too many trucks, too many drivers, which forces rates down, right? And then we have, President Trump, whatever any of my listeners think about him, is trying to renegotiate and rebalance world trade. They're trying to like resource and reshore manufacturing. And this operation that he's engaging in is not going to be without turbulence. Okay.
Oh no, it's going
Like,
to be absolute Armageddon. In my opinion, I think we're about to enter into a time where there's just not going to be loads out there to haul.
right. We have all these factors combining to basically say there's just not enough work. At some point, it collides with this truck financing thing you're talking
Yes, it
about,
does.
which I have not heard anyone else discuss. And I would like to think that I would have heard about that. I have been podcasting about trucking for like 3 years now. I write about this stuff. People contact me with like details and info all the time. You, Mr. Beech, are the very first person to raise this problem.
Well,
Okay.
Lord, I think they've committed such a great sin on the front end of all of this, where now, they've destroyed people's lives. They've certainly destroyed uh, my company that, in my opinion, was as financially strong as any other dry van carrier with just under 300 units should have been going into this. And, if they're not going to repossess anybody's trucks, everybody continued to make payments until they couldn't. And now me and other people that should have never been forced into deferral have been forced into deferral. Our company's decimated in so many ways that there may not be recovery from. And now that there's these tariffs are going to hit, okay, so is now the time when they finally decide, my God, it's going to be bad even longer now, and now they go out and start trying to execute repossessions. Okay, so are they going to repossess everybody that went into deferral way before me first, or are they going to come after the ones that makes the most financial sense for them at the time? I mean, certainly I'm not going to relinquish any of my equipment until someone has shown me there's nobody else on the books that has been into deferral longer than I have. Right? I mean, what do they expect us all to do? It's broken the entire system, and there's wonderful generational well-ran companies that have been completely decimated because the financial institutions would not execute their part of the cycle, Lord.
Yeah, an interesting thing you bring up here is a little bit of fairness, right? So like if you're trying to do the right thing, if you're trying to organize your finances and work out a deal and pay stuff off, and other people have been on deferrals for way longer than you know, when this house of cards collapses, that's a really good question. Like, who do they come for first? Do they come for like the scam artists? Do they come for the companies? And like, I don't want to cast any negative attitude on people that tried to come to America and make a better life for themselves, but a lot of those folks got sold a bill of goods, and a lot of those folks are working for people who are scammers. Are they going to come for them before you guys? Like, you know, how does this all look? And like, do you have any guess as to a timeline when like this actually does start to collapse? Because people are starting to like wonder about the trucking industry. They're going to start trying to like blame Trump on this because of tariffs, even though
Yeah.
the structural problems have existed for years beforehand.
Yes, Trump had nothing to do with the destruction of trucking, period. No way. Don't anybody believe that lie. This was done in 2023. This was done in the Biden action plan of 2021. This was done when the truck makers and dealers and everybody that was involved in selling 450,000 mile Freightliners, which should have been about an $85,000 retail truck. And they were, hell, I sold 18 4 to 500,000 mile Freightliners in the January of 2022. I sold them to dealers for $143,000 a piece.
Damn.
Yeah, never in that. Now, yes, yes, which, I told everybody that was money from heaven. It's never existed ever. I had $60,000 equity. And I should looking back, I should have turned the light switch off out there at my front door and sold all of my equipment. And I could have walked out of here with about $20 million. If I would have known there was a Biden trucking action plan, and I would have known that there was a memo issued that was not enforcing English proficiency, where was my advocate? I've been paying dues to the Arkansas Trucking Association ever since I've been in business. And I didn't find out about that memo from my advocates. I found out from Mother Trucker in 2023 when it was way too late. And I sure didn't hear a word about the Biden Trucking Action Plan. And then as soon as I found out about it, I went to the American Trucking Association website and I typed it in there because I just was going to see if it was on the website. Nope, it was nowhere on their website. And you would think they would be touting if it was their policy that they help with.
Wow.
Yeah. So they did it all. Gord, what I've learned about government, yes, government and special interests. What I've learned is they do a lot of stuff very, very, very quietly. And there's a lot of misdirection in all of this stuff. That Biden action plan, when you read it, that fact sheet, it talks about the women and the vets and the 18 to 20-year-olds. Man, that was not the results of that plan. You know what the results of that plan was. It was the rapid influx of that over 800,000 newly issued CDLs in about a year's time. And then it continues on today. Hey, wholesalers are beating me up. Everybody knows I've made it clear that we are about to execute a downsize of 100 trucks. So I've been talking to the wholesalers. They have been beating me up for the last 60 days. We need trucks, 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 trucks. Dealers are scrabbling for inventory. Used truck prices have gone up about $15,000 over the last 4 months or so. And then I don't know who released those stats on the net gain in authorities here in the last several months, but I'm telling you right now, there's just as many foreigners buying trucks today as there ever has been. Every one of these trucks out here. And you know what? As as much as I have put myself out there, and as much as Shannon and I have been screaming about the problem and the cancer, I'm hooked on it. The whole system
Yeah.
is now hooked on it. I know where these trucks that I've got parked out here are going, Lord. They're going to foreigners. That's exactly the very people that are killing me in competition with the cost structure I have no hope of ever touching with a 10-foot pole. I'm supplying them with even more trucks to go drive down the rates even more while there are no
Yeah, the whole thing,
taking
none
place.
of it makes any sense. I met you guys in person at Matt's recently, and I was invited to a dinner. You and Shannon weren't there, but I go to this dinner, and one of the guests at the dinner sitting across the table from me is a used truck dealer from New Jersey.
Hmm.
I think he said he had two or three locations, buy and sell trucks, right? All used trucks. And I put this question to him. I said, so what happens when, these guys who clearly not Americans, recent arrivals, whatever you want to call them, show up and want to buy a truck? I'm like, they have no credit history, right? Like, I'm an immigrant to the United States. Right. Okay. I married an American. I moved here in 2016. It has taken me forever to build my credit up because when you move here, your credit rating is based on your social security number. And mine was brand new. My credit rating in Canada did not come over the border with me, right? At all. I had to start over completely. So I asked this guy that's selling trucks, I'm like, how are these guys financing the trucks that they're buying from you? And he said, dude, like, they just come with a cashier's check. I don't know where they got the money from, but like, none of these, migrant groups who are buying trucks from me are financing them. They show up, they have a cashier's check. I have no idea where they get their money from. They never finance it. They are paying cash and driving away.
Yeah.
So there's another question for this whole deal here.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I know I have been told that somehow, they all had a $50,000 down payment. The ones that were financed, they all had $50,000 down payments. But you bring up a good point. Where's people's? How did they get this financing if they were new to our country? How did they get this financing? Where's the cash coming from that backed them? Or did we give people financing but with no credit history just because things were so good and we're selling this truck at such a big margin? Until you get to digging in there, you really don't know what the answers are. All we know is we watched it happen. Obviously, there was a whole bunch of people here buying trucks that had never been here before buying trucks, right? We would have never seen $160,000, 400,000 mile used truck. So there had to be some sort of new facility to make that happen. It either had to be outside money funding everyone that was paying cash, or our government money funding everyone that was paying cash, or and I know that this played a major part in it. The captives and financial institutions, they threw a bunch of historical underwriting procedures out the window because those profits were just so big. And
at that time, those profits are gone now.
Oh, they're gone now. They're gone now. And now those losses, those huge losses that are on everybody's books that are pending out there, they don't have to record the loss until they repossess the truck. And that is why. And I've heard what you said earlier, kicking the can down the road, we're just hoping and kicking it down the road that it's going to turn around. I've heard that come out of numerous mouths, numerous mouths. And it's not going to turn around. And they gotta know that. Whoever has made that decision to kick it down the road, they have absolutely got to lose their job when all of this pops. Anyone that is anyone that has any sense knows that there's no way this market turns until the financial institutions execute the repossessions. That's how this works.
I'm going to bring this back a little bit to some arguments I was making before I ever met you guys, before the, imported driver thing started. And it's about the function of free markets, right? A lot of people in trucking are like conservatives or libertarians for the most part. And we all want, or at least we talk about, operating in a supposedly quasi-free market. But the problem is that whenever you look into the specifics of how these things function, the government's always in there somehow. And then the bigger operators are trying to get the government to help them
Mm-hmm.
because they don't actually believe in the free market stuff, right? So before the Biden action plan, before the waiving of English proficiency stuff in 2016, we have a decades long claim about a shortage of truck drivers, right? I've talked about this ad nauseum,
Yes,
but
you
it's
have.
it's it's relevant here. Is that that's not true. There's been tons of people with CDLs and they quit. There's a retention problem.
Yes.
But instead of like the market, the free market, labor is a commodity like anything else. Labor is an cost input to running your business, like buying a truck or buying insurance or buying fuel. You have to pay what the market dictates, right? But the big carriers, the ATA members, and a bunch of other people have said, we don't believe in paying truck drivers market rate. They're just truck drivers. We can just turn anybody into a truck driver. And that's why you have CDL mills who are getting tons of government money to make new drivers. And then those people, I'm not casting aspersions on the people that try and get into trucking. Anybody that wants to try it, go ahead. Okay. The problem is they get into a market that's not correcting itself because the government money incentivizes carriers to continue hiring new people instead of making the industry better, wasting people's time less,
Yeah.
reducing detention, paying people more, doing whatever it is to keep the drivers you already have.
Yes.
So the trucking industry already had this great big huge elephant in the room that nobody wanted to talk about the government subsidizing the driver retention problem, right?
Yeah, I agree
And
a
so
100%. And
my, my
I've watched it, their wages over the road drivers most of my career because of what you just explained, which is basically being government welfare to subsidize wages, to keep wages suppressed, right? Um, so over my career, I watched journeyman plumbers, journeyman electricians, journeyman diesel mechanics at the dealership. You know, all of those journeymen done good 8 to 10 years. They're making more than what over the road company drivers were making. And ELOGs really started to affect the driver wage correction like should have already been happening. So the poor old American truck driver starts getting this wage correction. And you know, today, an over the road dry van or refrigerated, long haul, gone from home, 2 weeks at a time truck driver, and Lord, they ought to be making in the 115 to 130 range, in my opinion, as a company driver. They're certainly more regulated than these journeymans that get to go home every day. They're not out there with everyone's lives in their hands, and the lifestyle that comes with over the road that should demand a higher pay wage, and then also the more regulation that our citizen drivers are subjected to should demand a higher wage. And man, with inflation today, um, Gord, I mean, I had never really thought about it this way, but truck drivers could possibly be making less than they ever have in my career, relative when you put inflation and everything in there, because their wages have been just kneecapped by this rapid foreign influx of third world slave wage labor.
Yeah, no, the indentured servitude programs, this
Yes.
Biden action plan, the decades of corporate welfare, just all this stuff has added up to like basically crush the American truckers' wages. Um, yeah, my wife is signaling to me
Time
that
for
I
you to
gotta
go to the
go.
party.
But Mr. Beach, sir, I really appreciate your time. If you could like consolidate and compact everything you're saying into like one final message for everybody. I'm going to push this ahead of everyone else's podcast because I think this financialization problem and the issue of like the trucks not being repossessed and all of this stuff going on is an extremely important component of the story. Just boil it down for us and then we'll go.
Okay, well, there's one more thing that we haven't talked about, and it's the okay, what if it does turn around and some miracle takes place? And then we've got trucks that, we haven't been able to catch up on because we're still clawing from the oblivion. But they're wore out, okay? And this is going to be at scale. They're wore out, and we've got to trade them in if we're going to survive. But we are so upside down. So I think maybe what these financial institutions are going to try to do is somehow, make this kind of like a rolling thing. I don't know, to where they're not mass executing a repossession and having to do it all at once because that will cause collapse, and they're going to try to extend it out. I do know this: anybody that's failing today and their trucks are coming off the road, the banks have written some things down. I have consulted with a gentleman that's been in the financial part of this business for a very long time, and he's been working on behalf of banks and trucking companies. And he has seen some write downs that were, to the tune of $70,000. So it's out there, and it's pending, but that bubble is going to burst at some point, whether it's when they execute now or as carriers have to upgrade their fleets in the future, and there's such a large deficit on all this wore out equipment. Um, but I guess to just kind of sum it up, in my opinion, it all started when they executed the sales. The unchecked greed took over, and we were selling trucks for double the price at triple the market interest. I was buying used trucks at a very good price. I mean, new trucks at a very good price. And I know there's a lot of people out there that's paying $225,000 for a brand new truck that is probably worth $50,000 today, and it's not all that old. It may only have 350,000 miles on it. So, and the failure, this extended period of the failure to execute the repossessions has further destroyed and decimated the best of us that was left, that had done the right things and had the cash and the gunpowder to withstand all of this. So we've been waiting on all these trucks to be repossessed so there could be a balance and rate recovery, and we're still at the bottom. This freight recession started, or this rate slide, in February, March of 22, and we're in April of 25, and we have not achieved any recovery off the bottom. And going into this tariff crap, it's going to be even worse.
Yeah, 3 years at the bottom with no recovery and facing this rebalancing of the world economy at the same time is just it's just bad.
Yeah, and that right there, that fact that we're still in the very bottom tells you there has not been any trucks taken off the road of consequence. So it's either a fact of extended deferral, and I've also been told by that consultant I mentioned that he knows several carriers that have gone through an entire year of some form of deferral. Okay, so you've heard me and Shannon say this is not a freight cycle, it's a replacement cycle. Well, okay, they're either letting everybody go in eternal deferral and it's killing the rest of us along the way, or we're being replaced. As Americans fail and the trucks come off the road, they're immediately cycled through the wholesalers, and they're going straight to the foreigners that, by that recent publish, whoever it was, I don't know who put it out there, but it's a net gain in authorities over the last several months. There is no explanation for that other than the foreigners continue to flood and they continue to buy used trucks. And I'm seeing it and hearing it from all over the place. The wholesalers, the dealers, And then when we hear in the news that there's a net gain in authorities, when trucking companies are supposedly, just falling by the wayside, um, it all just points to this bubble is going to burst sometime, somehow. And there's been a lot of good people have their businesses destroyed because the financial institutions did not play their part properly in this market. The truck dealers and the makers sold those trucks, creating the bubble. They financed it, creating the bubble, and now they have committed that great sin, won't repossess all the trucks because I think they collapse if they do. And in the process, they've destroyed families. And like mine, our family's still here and our family's not destroyed, but there is family owned businesses for generations in this industry that have been completely decimated because of their failure to execute their role properly in the repossessions. And that is where we are today. And I don't think anybody knows the answer, Gord. You asked me when you thought or when I thought that they would start repossessing. I've asked people at those companies and they don't know. Yeah, it's not good.
Well, I hate to end it on such a negative note, but you know what? Unless people know this, you can't fix what you don't know needs to be fixed.
That's right.
And moving forward, what was the old, G.I. Joe, knowing is half the battle?
Yeah.
Now people know. And Mr. Beech, I really appreciate you joining the show and sharing all of this information with us. It's very valuable to people. And thank you so much.
Yes, sir. You know we love you, man. Go be with your people. I'll talk to you later.
Right. How do people find you online, sir?
Go visit us at ATU Truckers on X. Our website is americantruckers.com. We're on Facebook, American Truckers United. We need everybody's support. We're trying to get something done, trying to get something changed in this industry before we're all gone and replaced.
Right. Amen to that, sir. Thanks again, Harvey, and way of the road.